MDC alliance leaders face trouble over sanctions. Calls for those who allegedly called for sanctions to be arrested have resurfaced again, this time in Parliament, where ZANU-PF MPs are calling for the arrest of the MDC bigwigs they accuse of calling for sanctions. The fresh calls for the arrest of MDC bigwigs were made by ZANU-PF MP Kindness Paradza, who said, "Whether you are opposition or not, we are all affected by sanctions. For the past 18 years, we have been affected by sanctions. It is unfortunate that some of those who called for these sanctions are brilliant lawyers who are here. One of them is here, a very brilliant lawyer, a Zimbabwean, an honorable member of this parliament. I am also proposing that Parliament must come up with a law to say any Zimbabwean who calls for sanctions on his motherland must be prosecuted. Let us have a law to that effect. He must be prosecuted. This is very dangerous. As I said earlier, let us all have a national vision as Zimbabweans. ZANU-PF has maintained that the MDC called for sanctions in 2017, an allegation the MDC has always denied. Sanctions or trade and travel embargoes, as some would like to call them, were imposed on some individuals and entities by the EU and the US for various reasons. MDC alliance leaders face trouble over sanctions. Calls for those who allegedly called for sanctions to be arrested have resurfaced again, this time in Parliament, where ZANU-PF MPs are calling for the arrest of the MDC bigwigs they accuse of calling for sanctions. The fresh calls for the arrest of MDC bigwigs were made by ZANU-PF MP Kindness Paradza, who said, "Whether you are opposition or not, we are all affected by sanctions. For the past 18 years, we have been affected by sanctions. It is unfortunate that some of those who called for these sanctions are brilliant lawyers who are here. One of them is here, a very brilliant lawyer, a Zimbabwean, an honorable member of this parliament. I am also proposing that Parliament must come up with a law to say any Zimbabwean who calls for sanctions on his motherland must be prosecuted. Let us have a law to that effect. He must be prosecuted. This is very dangerous. As I said earlier, let us all have a national vision as Zimbabweans. ZANU-PF has maintained that the MDC called for sanctions in 2017, an allegation the MDC has always denied. Sanctions or trade and travel embargoes, as some would like to call them, were imposed on some individuals and entities by the EU and the US for various reasons. Chaos erupts in Mugati Apostolic Faith Church after First Lady Exilia Mnangagwa's visit. A visit by First Lady Exilia Mnangagwa to Mugati Apostolic Faith Church in Wedza on a cancer screening awareness program has divided the church, with one faction accusing the late founder Tando Mugati sympathizers of disrespecting their religious beliefs. This was revealed on Saturday at the burial of Tando by the faction which is fighting to wrest control of the church from Mugati's family. The faction accused its rivals of inviting the First Lady for cancer screening, a medical process which they claim was against their beliefs. The First Lady visited the shrine in April last year alongside government officials from the Health Ministry as part of her nationwide awareness campaign on free cancer screening. Zimbabwe Amalgamated Churches Council patron Jimmy Mujavuri, who also attended the burial at the weekend, confirmed the matter yesterday, saying the cancer screening exercise had brought divisions within the sect. I am aware of the issue, and it is being propped up by one Mangoma. The First Lady is a national figure, not a political one. She is doing a national duty, hence the invite by the apostolic members. We heard that some of them are questioning why the First Lady visited the church. This is dividing the sect, of which it is not good, he said. Some of the country's white garment-donning apostolic churches have been abandoning their archaic religious beliefs and embracing modern medical treatment. However, others are still deeply rooted in their religious beliefs that shun medical assistance. The Mugati Apostolic sect is currently embroiled in a nasty leadership wrangle that has resulted in factionalism breaking out. Tando died last week and was buried at the church headquarters at Chitip in Wedza. He was succeeded by his son Washington, a move that has, however, angered his rivals. ZANU-PF member and MDC youth leaders speak out after Mnangagwa's anti-sanctions march flopped. ZANU-PF activist Alex Gakinch has said the flopped anti-sanctions march held on Friday was not about numbers, but about sending a clear message to America and the European Union, EU. The march, a brainchild of SADC, was meant to put out a united message by the region against sanctions on Zimbabwe, which are being blamed for causing the current economic decay. But besides the over 200 free buses available to bus people from the country's 10 provinces, primary and secondary school pupils, a soccer match between Dynamos and Highlanders, as well as musical gala by the country's finest musicians, the event still failed to attract a meaningful crowd that could fill the giant national sports stadium. Even with the roping in of Pollitt members such as Lovemore Madhuku, Torin Tiki and others, as well as controversial Linda Massaria, still the numbers were too low to prevent President Emmerson Mnangagwa from the embarrassment of walking into and addressing a virtually empty stadium. In an interview, SANU activist Gakanj said they were not particularly looking for numbers at the march, adding that it was the message which was important at the end of the day. This was not at all about numbers, but sending a clear message to our oppressors, he said. Gakanj added that failing to fill the stadium is not an issue, as Premier Soccer League teams are also failing to draw huge crowds to their matches. However, MDC Youth Assembly spokesperson Stephen Chuma said he was not surprised by flop, adding that Zimbabweans had better things to do than the march. It is not surprising that the ZANU-PF so-called anti-sanctions march flopped. Zimbabweans are currently faced with problems like electricity outages, high prices, and water shortages, hence their choice to stay away from this non-event. It is very clear that the anti-sanctions rhetoric represents a pie in the sky and is meant to chlorinate President Emmerson Mnangagwa's failed leadership. Unfortunately, it did not yield the desired result, said Chuma. Victor Mtamandanda faces trouble after Zimbabweans ignored Mnangagwa's anti-sanctions march. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has been urged to fire his national political commissar Victor Mtamandanda due to his failure to organize the much-hyped anti-sanctions march. Former ZANU-PF youth leader William Muchimenge said, if Mnangagwa does not fire his political commissar now, he will not last 6 months. He has turned into political embarrassment home and away. Imagine world leaders listening to that comical speech and taking him seriously. The nationwide demonstrations were organized by government, and ZANU-PF structures were organized all over the country to attend the provincial events. The events were marked with low attendance, with the main one held at the National Sports attracting less than a quarter of its capacity. Social media users compared Mtamandanda with the exiled savior Kasukuwere, who used to fill up all the stadiums during his time as commissar. Norton Member of Parliament, Temba Maliswa, blamed some ZANU-PF officials for the confusion that led to the low turnout. This sanctions march is turning out to be a ZANU-PF march. There's confusion. People from ZANU-PF have been given fuel coupons and not the sitting MPs to organize the logistics, said Maliswa. They're already fighting for those coupons. People like Nduna were given 9K liters. There's no accountability. There's just a cartel of people in ZANU-PF in there for their own selfish gains. Victor Mtamandanda faces trouble after Zimbabweans ignored Mnangagwa's anti-sanctions march. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has been urged to fire his national political commissar Victor Mtamandanda due to his failure to organize the much-hyped anti-sanctions march. Former ZANU-PF youth leader William Muchimenge said, if Mnangagwa does not fire his political commissar now, he will not last 6 months. He has turned into political embarrassment home and away. Imagine world leaders listening to that comical speech and taking him seriously. The nationwide demonstrations were organized by government, and ZANU-PF structures were organized all over the country to attend the provincial events. The events were marked with low attendance, with the main one held at the National Sports attracting less than a quarter of its capacity. Social media users compared Mtamandanda with the exiled savior Kasukuwere, who used to fill up all the stadiums during his time as commissar. Norton Member of Parliament, Temba Maliswa, blamed some ZANU-PF officials for the confusion that led to the low turnout. This sanctions march is turning out to be a ZANU-PF march. There's confusion. People from ZANU-PF have been given fuel coupons and not the sitting MPs to organize the logistics, said Maliswa. They're already fighting for those coupons. People like Nduna were given 9K liters. There's no accountability. There's just a cartel of people in ZANU-PF in there for their own selfish gains. Mnangagwa left red-faced after his anti-sanctions march flopped. President Emmerson Mnangagwa was yesterday left red-faced after only 7,000 people turned up for his much-hyped anti-sanctions march. Zimbabweans, battling skyrocketing prices, rising inflation and low pay, snubbed the march against the West to remove sanctions imposed in 2001. The giant National Sports Stadium, which has a seating capacity of 60,000, was sparsely occupied as even some of the people bussed from outside Harare opted to fight over freebies, which included t-shirts and food, which were being dished outside the venue. In the run-up to the march, ZANU-PF party and government officials demanded that school children be released to take part in the march, while Mnangagwa declared a national holiday to facilitate attendance. Mnangagwa is struggling to deal with Zimbabwe's worst economic crisis in a decade, with the country enduring rolling power cuts of up to 18 hours daily and shortages of foreign exchange, fuel and medicines. The European Union, EU, and United States imposed financial and travel bans on top ZANU-PF and top figures for alleged human rights abuses and electoral fraud in 2001. The EU has since removed the embargo. In the days leading to the march, most government workers were being threatened to attend, and out registers would be marked at the protest. Some buses deployed to pick up participants from various areas across the country came back empty after people snubbed them, with one 75-seater bus coming with 7 passengers from Zimbabwe and Mashonaland Central. We were 32 passengers on the bus from Zimbabwe, but the second bus only had 7 people on board, said one participant who requested anonymity. We were being threatened with being denied inputs for this year's agricultural season if we failed to come to Harare for the anti-sanctions march. Addressing the participants, who marched from Robert Mugabe Square to the stadium, Mnangagwa thanked people from all walks of life who came in such large numbers to mark this important day. He said the sanctions had caused untold suffering to the ordinary people and were perpetuating the cycle of poverty in the country. Thank you, SEC, by standing by us and for speaking with one voice at the 74th session of the UN General Assembly. We also say thank you to the African Union and Progressive World for supporting us during these difficult years in the history of our economy, Mnangagwa said. He claimed that the sanctions were a reaction to the land reform program. Ours was a fight to reunite the people with their land and the land with its people, which promise we fulfilled during the land reform exercise. However, this had dire consequences and led to the imposition of the illegal and unjustified sanctions by the European Union and the United States of America. He said the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, passed in 2001, prohibits Zimbabwean entities from doing business with the U.S. and denies the country access to international lines of credit from the International Monetary Fund and World Bank as well as development finance. SEDERA has blocked Zimbabwe's access to international credit markets, leading to the drying up of traditional sources of external finance, he said, adding that the negative perception created by the embargoes deny the country foreign inflows. Mnangagwa claimed that his government had taken deliberate steps to make political and economic reforms. The far-reaching implications on SADC's ability to achieve its collective targets in the social, economic, and financial spheres cannot be ignored. This is the reality of these sanctions. No amount of propaganda can spin or sugarcoat this gruesome truth. He said government programs such as Command Agriculture, which is at the center of a US $3 billion scandal, would be used to mitigate the impact of sanctions. But the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee has accused Mnangagwa's regime of trying to hide its failures by hiding behind sanctions. The committee's chairman, Senator Jim Risch, said Mnangagwa's government should instead focus on improving its governance record. Responsibility for the current political and economic crisis in Zimbabwe falls solely on the ruling regime that has governed the country for decades. If Zimbabwe's leaders put as much time, financial resources, and effort into delivering on their long-promised reforms as they have in distorting facts and organizing anti-sanctions campaigns, Zimbabweans would not continue to suffer under the dire economic and humanitarian conditions they face today. The U.S. does not sanction people without just cause. Sanctions are a response to malign activity, said Risch in a press release on Thursday night. In Gweru, businesses and informal traders yesterday operated as usual while at Kutsinai long-distance bus terminus. Traders completely ignored the march, which was led by Midlands Provincial Affairs Minister Larry Mavhima. A crowd of people bussed from mainly Chiwandura, Lower Gweru, Mkopa, and Piri urban areas surrounding the city constituted the majority of the marchers. Riot police maintained heavy presence during the march. Traffic police had a torrid time trying to stop motorists from moving into the central business district ahead of the march as the drivers insisted they wanted to carry out their daily business operations. At the venue of the anti-sanctions march, affiliates of ZANU-PF like war veterans gave solidarity messages, and Mavhima later read Mnangagwa's speech. In Manicaland, very few people took to the streets for the march despite reports of some shops being forced to close by suspected ZANU-PF activists to mobilize demonstrators. The march started late after a vain wait for participants. However, addressing journalists after the gathering, Manicaland Provincial Affairs Minister Ellen Gwarizimba defended the low turnout, saying people were still learning the importance of the day. It is not a bad start. Demonstrations started late. People are still in the process of learning the importance of the day. It was quite a sizable crowd, but it started late. At the same time, I can't really complain, she said. The march in Bulawayo was a non-event, with very few people bothering to turn up at White City Stadium despite the provision of cheap transport to the venue. Bulawayo Metropolitan Affairs Minister Judith Nkube read Mnangagwa's speech, which was attended by Industry Deputy Minister Raj Modi, ZANU-PF Central Committee member Angeline Masuku, ZANU-PF Politburo member Absalom Sikisana, and former Makakoba legislator Chingav Tu, among others. The regional Southern African Development Community rallied behind Zimbabwe's call for an end to sanctions. Attendance was much better at the South African side of the Beitbridge border post, where African National Congress Secretary-General Ace Magashule. He addressed about 1,000 members of the party from the Limpopo province who braved the heat for the march. Magashule said sanctions against Zimbabwe were hurting the entire region and liberation movements ruling SADC countries would rally behind the country to have them removed. He said his country had started educating its nationals against xenophobia, which was a direct result of the sanctions. The Yank stalwart also said Africans were one people and must unite against imperialism and US-led sanctions against Zimbabwe, which despite being targeted hurt everyone.